The listeners really appreciated listening to you last time, Stan, about how we can take from your experience and apply that to bridging divides. And now that you've got a new book out on character, um, the first question I have to ask you is, you have this very elegant formula in the book that character is convictions times discipline. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I was trained as an engineer, so I think in formulas.
Right.
But the way I came out on this one is convictions, which I really interpret as your values or your beliefs, but not just superficial ones, deeply held beliefs, ones you've actually thought about, ones you've pressure tested, things you're willing to live to or maybe die for. Those are those core things that you hold dear, and they're great.
Yeah.
But you need another part of the equation, because discipline is the other part of it. Because if you have the greatest convictions in the world, but you lack the discipline to live to them, then you've got zero, because anything times zero is zero. So I think you need the two parts of that. And sometimes we celebrate convictions, but we lack the courage or the discipline to adhere to them.
So, as I told you right before you came on, I especially appreciated reading this book because I had actually just come out of a period of personal burnout, and I was looking for ways to think about how to structure my life moving forward. And one of the things that you started the book with was actually you submitting your resignation to President Obama after the Rolling Stone magazine article. And I think actually you wrote that it's a magazine that I don't read much, but it seemed to have altered my life. Can you speak a little bit to what it was like to have your identity challenged almost in such a public way, and how you went through the process of, as you talk about, renewing your identity over the years?
Yeah. For your listeners, because many won't be intimately familiar with that or remember it as clearly as I do,
Yeah.
I was in the military for all of my grown life. I was born in an Army hospital. My father was a soldier. My father's father was a soldier. I went at age 17 to West Point, graduated 4 years later, and then served the next more than 34 years as a commissioned officer. So everything about me was identified with being a soldier. It was what I enjoyed, what I cared deeply about. It was how I thought of myself. If you'd asked me, what are you? My reflexive response was, I'm a soldier. Now, I was a father. I was lots of other things, but at the core, I was a soldier. And what happened is I'd gone through a number of assignments, 3 wars and whatnot. Now I'm a 4-star general, which is the highest rank you can have. And so on that metric, I'd been successful. And I was commanding all forces in Afghanistan, about 150,000 coalition or Western forces, then about 300,000 Afghans. So it was a big job. And so I'm a commander, I'm a general, I'm a soldier. And a story came out in the Rolling Stone magazine by a freelance reporter. And it was a story that I didn't think was particularly accurate or fair, but that didn't matter. I'm responsible for what happened. So I offered my resignation to President Barack Obama. And he was gracious in our interaction, but he accepted it. So in an instant, after 38 plus years in uniform, suddenly I'm not a commander, I'm not a general, I'm not even a soldier. And so all of the things that I would have used to describe or define myself or to make myself feel good about myself were now gone, or at least in my mind they were. And I remember, because you start to figure out, if I'm not that, who am I? And if I'm not that, am I anything other than a disgraced general? Because this is the summer 2010, and I'm on the ticker of the news shows, the cable news shows, every 2 minutes. You know, my name, my 86-year-old father's watching this down in Tennessee, and that's just torturous for me to think about. My son was down at Florida State, and he's watching it, and I knew that had to be hard for him. And so I'm wrestling with this question of, So who am I and what do I do about that or with that? And it took me a while to learn what I should have known all along. And that was I wasn't any different than I was the moment before when I was all those things. You know, the same person was inside the uniform that was now inside other clothes.
Hmm.
The character that I have or don't have is the same. And the great thing about it is it's my choice. That character is what I choose to be. And without pulling this on too long, I had studied Admiral James Stockdale, who is a naval aviator who'd been shot down early in the Vietnam War and spent 7 years in captivity. And he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his courage in captivity. But as he describes, he broke under torture and he made recordings that he swore he'd never do. So, in one sense, by one metric, he was a failure. He failed to do what we tell American service members to do when they get captured. Now, it was unrealistic to expect that, but he still failed. And he dealt with that. He says, I can't control my physical conditions. I don't have my freedom. I don't have anything. And they have made me on one level of failure, but I do control my character. I
Hmm.
control how I think about myself and how I treat other people. When you learn that basic lesson, you suddenly are kind of liberated because there's something nobody can take away.
Hmm.
Only you can give it away. And that was, it certainly took me to late in life to sort of come to that realization, but it became very empowering.
When you speak about character as something that no one can take away from you, and yet for 38 years, as you described, and before that, you perceived yourself as a soldier. So this was who you were. This was your identity, and suddenly it was not only stripped away, but there was a public scene to it, which I'm sure exacted a deep emotional toll. In fact, as I was reading your book, it seemed to me clear that your wife has played a significant role in your life and in the way in which you've overcome some of those obstacles. How do you go about overcoming that sort of identity fracture? Because that sense of my identity being tied to something outside of me is something that a lot of people today wrestle with, and in some ways a big cause of our political polarization. But we'll hold on that for a second. I'm just curious how you overcome that identity fracture.
Yeah. And I'm going to use 3 or 4 examples. So
Please, please.
bear with me. The first is your tendency is to care about what people think and to assume you know what people think. So soon after I left the service, if I had to travel, I went in an airport, I'd see people from across an area point at me and then whisper one person to another. And you always assume they're saying something bad about you.
Hmm.
And yet, every time I interacted with someone, they were incredibly gracious. So, most of that was in my mind. Everyone cared about what happened to Stan McChrystal. The reality is, most people didn't care. And after 48 hours, most people didn't even remember.
Hmm.
But, in your own mind, you're the only person that's ever gone through this. And so you
We're
feel
each the
badly
main
about it.
character.
Exactly. And so there was that first part of it. And then as you start to define what that means, okay, if I am not the person that they think, who am I? What can I be? The people who do care about you come back and remind you what matters. What is it about you that they actually loved? My wife Annie reminded me it wasn't that she loved a general,
Hmm.
she loved me. She didn't love just a soldier, she loved me. She cared. In fact, what she told me when I first told her that the president accepted my resignation was good. We've always been happy and will always be happy. And if you think about that, in an instant, she validated our life to date. She said, I'm glad I married you. And the second is she validated our life in the future
Hmm.
by saying, we will be happy. She didn't make it conditional. She said she was with me and we would be happy. And that's an extraordinary statement to make and incredibly reinforcing. So as you start to identify who you are and what you're going to be, then you come back and say, all right, if being all the things that I was they weren't inconsequential, but they weren't all consuming, what is left to me and what can I be now? And it starts with, I can be a person of character, because I didn't know what I'd do. I didn't know what a job I'd have. I didn't know anything that I didn't ever think I'd write a book, much less multiple books. And so I couldn't fall back on that and say, okay, I've got this great future ahead. I had this big question mark ahead. But what I could do is I could be the person that people had believed in before, to validate that, and I could be the person that they had reason to believe in the future. And that's a lot of agency to possess.